My name is Crystal Coburn, and I am the chair of the Women and Minorities in Profession Commission for the Young Lawyers Conference of the Virginia State Bar. And I'd like to welcome you to our conference call series. And today our talk will be on balancing law practice and family with public service. We need to thank a few people at the outset. So this call was pretty much masterminded by Jeree Thomas, who knew of Delegate McClellan and thought she'd be a fantastic speaker. So we really have to thank her for all the work that she put into getting this call to happen today. We'd also like to thank Delegate McClellan for taking time out of what must be quite a schedule to talk with us, say that we really appreciate that. And also to thank Chris, who is sort of the behind-the-scenes advertising guy who we turn to constantly and who never says no. So we really appreciate that. So the format for the call today is going to be about 40 to 45 minutes of Delegate McClellan's presentation, and then there will be about 10 minutes of questions at the end. And Jeree is going to go ahead and introduce Ms. McClellan.
Hello, everyone. It is my great pleasure to introduce Delegate Jennifer McClellan. As you know, she was elected to the Virginia House of Delegates from the 71st District in 2005. She is a member of the Virginia Legislative Black Caucus and serves as the State Director of the National Federation of Women Legislators. She's currently an Assistant General Counsel at Verizon Communications, focusing on state regulatory matters for the Mid-Atlantic and Midwest regions. She is a member of the Virginia State Bar's Diversity Conference, past president of the Virginia State Bar Young Lawyers Conference, and past chair of the Virginia State Bar's Corporate Counsel section. She received her Bachelor of Arts from the University of Richmond and her JD from the University of Virginia, and she is currently married and lives in the Fan District with her husband and her son. Welcome, Jennifer McClellan.
Thank you, Jeree, Crystal, and Chris for setting this up, and thanks for everybody listening on the call. First, I just want to say anyone that knows me knows that I'm not one to just talk for 45 minutes. I'm typically much more interactive, so I'll probably have a little bit more time for questions. But, today was asked to talk a little bit about balancing life as a lawyer, legislator, and mother. I've been sort of tickled by that because especially during Women's History Month and over the past year, I've been asked to speak on that very topic. And typically I am asked, how do you do it? And I would be the first to admit I'm still figuring that out as I go along, as I think many other people are. It was a lot easier when I first started my practice as a lawyer. And as I get older and life gets more complicated, it's certainly more difficult to do. But I think there are some basic strategies and basic lessons that can be taken from my experience that could apply to pretty much any career. Anybody who's trying to balance a career, some semblance of public service, whether it's through the bar, community organizations, charitable organizations, or elected or appointed office, and balancing that with the obligations of your family. So let me just give a little bit about how I got here. I think my story, particularly as an elected official, is a little bit backwards from most women who get involved in politics. The traditional route has been that women get involved when they're older, typically after they've had their families. Many got involved in politics because of their families, either through getting involved with the schools and that leading to people running for the school board, or I've heard lots of stories of people getting active in politics or the League of Women Voters or their local Democratic or Republican committee to get away from the family sometimes. And my path was the opposite. I was interested in public service at a young age, come from a family that was community-oriented, decided pretty much in middle school that I wanted to be a part of government. At the time, didn't know that meant I would be in it, but knew that I was interested in serving in some fashion. My original plan was to do that as a career. My plan was to go to law school and go and work either for a congressional committee or be a lawyer for the government. but sometimes things don't quite work out the way you planned. And while I was in law school, Republicans took over Congress, and shortly after I graduated law school, Republicans took over the government in Virginia, and being a lifelong Democrat, I didn't really want to work for them. So I ended up working for a law firm, which was the exact opposite of what I expected to do. But like most people in the law school environment, you get caught up in the summer associate job track, and I did that and found that I actually enjoyed the work that I did. I lucked out in that when I started practice at Hunt & Williams, it was right after the Telecommunications Act of 1996 had passed, and starting almost my first day, I was working almost exclusively on implementing that act, which for me was in a way better than working for government, because while I had always focused on how bills became law, I had not until then focused on, well, what happens next. And at that time, to be on the sort of on the ground floor creating whole new laws to apply to an industry that has been a regulated monopoly was quite fascinating, and gave me a very different perspective on public policy and what happens after Congress passes an act. As I continued, I always stayed involved in politics and sort of just was trying to balance life as an associate at Hunt & Williams. I was very active in the state bar and the VBA, and started to get involved in the community. But I think early on, a lot of times my focus, like most associates, was on meeting billable hours and doing, I was sort of on the partner track and doing what you thought you needed to do to get there. Again, life kind of intervened, and in 2002, I was offered the opportunity to go in-house at Verizon. And once I got out of the law firm life, I started to realize that there were a wide variety of ways to have an impact and be a force for change, either through government or through corporate America. Shortly after that was when I had the opportunity to run for office. Again, not my plan, but Viola Baskerville, who held this seat before me, decided to run for lieutenant governor, and the seat opened up. And I was really at a crossroads where I tried to decide what was my path. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought I really did want to be not just working to get other people elected to affect the change that I wanted to see, but I wanted to be the one doing it. And so, but I also asked myself, are you willing to take a risk? And I thought, if I run and lose, then that's my answer. Public office is not my path. If I don't run, I would always wonder what if. And so I decided to run. I won, and sort of have been in the House ever since, balancing now that being a corporate attorney. And then I met my husband. My first session, he and I started to date, which was quite interesting, basically dating someone in a public fishbowl. We got married. We had my son. And then it really did begin to be a juggling act, trying to balance a new family with the demands of a career and the demands of being an elected official, which in the past year has only gotten more complicated as my parents have started to age. And 2 years ago, my father was diagnosed with cancer. And so I became part of the sandwich generation that you always hear of, someone trying to take care of their children and their parents and everything else. So what have I learned from all of that? I think the bottom line is you have to know who you are at your core. What are your priorities? What are your goals? And looking out 10, 20, 30 years from now, what is it you want to have accomplished? I think many of us fall into the trap of doing what other people expect for us, or taking the path that other people lay out for us. But if we're not truly committed to that path, then when we reach the points where we need to juggle things, we will lose sight of our priorities. If you know your priorities and you know your path, you can adjust. So for me, my number one priority is my family. At the end of my life, if I could have passed the best law that made the hugest impact and was the greatest thing to ever come out of Virginia, I could win the biggest case that ever came out of Virginia. But if I screw up my family, to me, it is not worth it. And so when I find myself in a position where I have to choose, that is my core, and it helps me make choices when I have to. Having said that, you also have to know when you need help and not be afraid to ask for help. I think a lot of young lawyers, particularly women, but not exclusively, fall into the trap of I have to do everything myself and I have to find a way to balance by myself, when you don't. We are, whether you're at work, whether you're in a family, or whether you're part of the community, you are part of a team. And where, if you ask for help, whether it's I need someone to pick my child up from daycare, I need someone to help me finish this brief, it is not a sign of weakness to ask for that help. Usually, if you do something as a group effort, it's a much stronger product anyway. And so I think we need to not be afraid to ask for that. You also need to not be afraid to fail, again, which is very difficult for a lot of people just starting out in a career. But if you look back over history, certainly in my life, but if you look at the great innovators, the great men and women of history, they took risks. They were not afraid to fail, and some of them did fail, and they picked themselves up, learned from that failure, and moved on. And I think, whether it's the business world, the political world, probably in your own life, you can see an example of someone who failed, maybe failed greatly, but picked up and moved on. You also have to be willing to sort of stray from the script. I alluded to this, but in my own life, I had a set plan of what I thought I was going to do. But sometimes, things happen or moments choose you rather than you choosing the moment. And you have to be willing to improvise a little bit and stray from the script of your life that you've set out. Often when those opportunities come, if you don't take them, you'll always wonder, what if? And again, a lot of that is just not being afraid to take a chance and take a risk on something. And then, finally, no matter what you're trying to balance, you have to take time for yourself. Again, very difficult the further you go in life. But if I don't take a moment to take care of myself, whether I am going to take a vacation day, I'm going to go to a spa or go to the doctor, whatever, if I don't do that and I get sick or I get worn out or I get run down, I am no good to anybody. I am no good to my employer. I am no good to the constituents that expect me to solve their problems, and I'm certainly no good to my family. And again, that is very difficult, particularly for women, but not exclusively, to remember to do that. But you just have to force yourself to do it. So that's basically my advice, and it looks like I did that in 15 minutes instead of 45, so I can either keep talking, or if we've got some more questions, I'd rather answer those, and that might spark a little bit of a conversation.
I have a question. This is Cherie. I've had an opportunity to look over your bio, Jennifer, and I know you've been really active in a lot of really interesting organizations, and you've served in leadership positions in those organizations. Is there any particular, activity that you've been a part of that you felt you learned a lot from, you gained a lot of skills from, and that whether you're still doing it now or you've finished with it, that you've taken those skills and you still use them today?
Sure, that's good. That's a great question. I'd say everything that I do teaches me something, but most of the skills that have come in handiest, I learned from my family. Everything from, I was the youngest of 3 daughters who watched my older sisters fight with my dad and never get their way. And I learned if you negotiate or, listen to his point of view and then respond, you're better off and you're more likely to get what it is you're trying to get. And that served me very well in the House of Delegates as, a member of the minority party. Learning patience of dealing with a 3-year-old and their logic and their, like, I want this right now, sort of helps deal with the personalities that you may find either in a job or in public life. But beyond that, I think the organization I've learned the most from is the Sorensen Institute. That was where, and again, it was in a political context, but it's an organization. They have a 10-month leadership program where you spend 1 week in a month in different parts of the state. There are about 30 people in the class. They're equally split between Democrats, Republicans, and independents. They're pretty well geographically split. And I learned that despite all of our differences at our core, we all have the same goals. And once you learn to appreciate a different point of view, you can find common ground and get things accomplished. And that skill has served me well as a lawyer, in the community, and particularly in the legislature, because I think too many times, and especially if you're in an adversarial situation, too many times we will fall back on, well, I am right. I will only talk to and listen to people who agree with me, and then we get gridlock. When you understand where someone else is coming from, even if you don't agree with their point of view, but you understand it, then you can find where can we agree, where is there common ground, let's start from there. If you don't do that, you won't accomplish anything. And then I have to give a plug, obviously, to the Young Lawyers Conference. I think the wide variety of people that I met from all across the state in all different practices and working together, again, to achieve a common goal through the programs that we did through the Young Lawyers Conference, or now that I do through the Diversity Conference. It's, again, the same thing. The more you start to get to know a wide variety of people, the more you realize, what, we all basically are the same. As John F. Kennedy once said, we all breathe the same air, we all cherish our children's future. We may have very different philosophies of life, but we all want the same thing. Any other questions?
Thank you.
I have a question. This is Crystal. And, I was listening to how you were describing how you arrived to where you were and where you are, and your willingness to be open to whatever challenge or opportunity presented itself. And for a lot of young lawyers today who were in law school around 2007 or so, and then emerged into a really challenging economy, the pressures of trying to find our way or the right way to go can be increasingly pressure-filled. Mm-hmm. Do you have any advice for young lawyers who are facing challenging employment situations or who just are feeling sort of bewildered as to how to navigate the current legal environment?
That's an excellent question. I think, and you kind of alluded to it, keep an open mind. Having a law degree does not mean you have to practice what people traditionally view as the law. I think, and depending on what law school you went to, there are so many people who fall into the trap of, I have to work at a law firm, or I have to be in the legal department of a company or a business. But there is such a wide variety of jobs that lawyers can do, whether it's in the government, working for a nonprofit. The legislature we have our own legal department and legislative services that writes all of the laws and staffs all of our committees. Every state agency has a legal team. But your training in law school did not prepare you just to practice law. It also prepared you to be a leader, because it prepared you to think critically in a way that most people don't. And what I have seen, especially at Verizon, but not exclusively, is those skills translate across disciplines. So we have had here at Verizon, you have people who go from the legal department to the business side, from the legal department to marketing, to public relations, to, you name it. You're not stuck with just being in the legal department or working for a law firm or being in a courtroom, but your skills really open the door to any job where critical thinking skills and problem-solving skills and communication skills can be used.
Thank you.
I have another question. This is Sheree,
okay.
But it's slightly different topic. So I know that, like I said before, I know that you've been involved in a lot of different activities. I was wondering if you could talk about any issue that's like particularly close to your heart, and in your fantasy, what would be legislation or something that you would do that would impact that particular issue.
Oh, that's a really good question. So, what I try to do when I'm deciding whether or not to be involved in an organization, and there was a time, and I think we all fall in this trap, where I had a hard time saying no. So if somebody asked me to do something, I thought, oh, I'm needed, and I'm going to say yes. And then you realize that you're doing something that you don't really enjoy and you don't get any satisfaction out of. And so I think the first step is to be more selective in what you do and why you do it. So for me, at my core, I have a desire to help people, to solve problems, and particularly to solve problems of people who are less fortunate or vulnerable or who don't have a voice. So a lot of the organizations that I have been involved in have given me an outlet to do that, whether it's, when I was on the board of the Flagler Home at St. Joseph's Villa, that's a big part of why I ran for office, the domestic violence-related commissions that I've served on. That's why I do that. All of us, I think, have an interest in something that is totally unrelated to anything that we do for a living or would ever do for a living. Again, for me, I am a huge history buff. I love history. I think there are lessons to be learned from our past that resonate even today. There are great examples of leaders throughout history, great role models for pretty much anything you're looking for a role model for. There are also examples of people not to be like. And so I look for opportunities to, feed that passion and to also help other people to enjoy that passion. I'm struggling a little bit with your the second part of your question, because there's so many. It's hard to pick one. I mean, I have consistently put in legislation on domestic violence issues, and I've been successful on some, but none of them has gone as far as they could. And so, when I first got elected, I put in a bill to strengthen the penalties for stalking to make it a felony after your second conviction, and we're still not there yet. I think right now we're in the midst of budget fight over whether or not to expand Medicaid, and I want to make that happen, because there are hundreds of thousands of Virginians who fall into the health care coverage gap, and there are real consequences for them, for society, and for our economy as a result of it. So that's part of what motivates me and why I choose the organizations that I choose. And then there is a certain amount of, and I think, most lawyers are type A personalities who just like to feel needed and like to get in and, solve a problem. And there is a certain amount of still not being able to say no. But again, the busier you get, the more you got to learn how to do that. Anybody else?
Okay, it's going to be me again then. Because obviously I asked you to join the call because I had a whole bunch of questions for you. You mentioned that you going into public service was something you knew that you wanted to do public service related work, but the timing as far as like becoming a delegate and that whole process was something that came about because the person who held your position before decided to run for another office.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering if you could talk more about sort of what you weighed in making that decision to do it, and the process of saying, okay, I think I want to I want to run for office, and
Sure.
what did that entail?
Sure. So I had just started, I started at Verizon in 2002. So I was, pretty new to corporate world, was just starting to figure it out, was sort of starting to realize that corporations and corporate America is also a force for change, but you got to be high enough in the leadership structure to direct that change. And so for me, it was really a struggle with deciding what is my path. And what I really, I just sort of went back to my core. What is it that I want to accomplish with my life? What is it that I enjoy? What is it that I have the skills for? And what is it that I have prepared myself for? And, from the first day I stepped on the college campus at the University of Richmond and joined the Young Democrats, whether I realized it or not, everything that I had done as a hobby through politics was leading me to run for office myself and have a career in public service. And the more I thought about it, it was a matter of, do you want to spend your time working to get other people elected with the hope they will work for the kind of change that you want, or do you want to do it? And, again, most type A personalities think nobody can do it better than they can. So, that was a big part of my decision. But it also was a matter of, why not? It was sort of asking myself, why not me? I'm just as capable, just as bright, just as talented as a lot of other people that run. Like, why not do it? And it really was if I don't take this risk, I'll always wonder, well, what if? And I didn't. If I ran and lost, that would be my answer. And, I talked to a lot of friends, I prayed about it, I talked to my family, but at the end of the day, I just kind of went back to my core and said, what is it that you want to do with your life? And the more I thought about it, the more I realized, I really do want to serve in an elected capacity. And I think I have seen a lot of people, and I think I have run the risk of falling into this trap too, that you just go with the flow. You just kind of go along with what life, like the path you're on, and you never think about, well, is this the right path? An opportunity comes and you just take it, but you don't stop to think strategically about, where is it that I want to go? And so when you do come to the fork in the road, a lot of people will take the easiest path, not necessarily the path that is the one that fits them as to who they are at their core.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else?
I have a question about building a network, but I guess I'm hesitating because what I'm really curious about is, there's always a lot of talk about networking, but it often feels as if networking sort of means, I find you, you find me, and we figure out how we can benefit from one another.
Yeah.
But I think that I'm more interested in figuring out, how do you build relationships that have some sort of meaning and can sustain over time, and that certainly they will be resources, but the end point of the relationship is not just to get something out of it, especially if you're building with people who are more experienced than you?
That is a very good question, and it's become a lot more complicated today than when I first, when I graduated, from college. Like the internet was just, emerging, and you sent emails like every once in a while, but it was still, networking still meant you had to go out and physically interact with people, and now, as connected as we have become, we've lost that sort of face-to-face interaction, and a lot of it is just because we don't have time. And so it is a lot harder to build and sustain those relationships. But the way I've done it is through the work that I'm doing. And that's another reason that I got involved in so many different organizations early, because, part of it was to meet people. The best way to forge a relationship with somebody is trying to work with them to accomplish a goal. Through that process, you're also getting to know them as a person, but you're spending time socializing with them, and that's where those connections are drawn. I mean, if you think back, as I think back, some of my closest friends are people that I met through either the Young Democrats or the Young Lawyers or Sorensen or something where we were working together, in some cases we were working together to accomplish a goal. And in doing that, we came to trust one another. We came to know each other's strengths and weaknesses. We came to see, I know I can rely on you under certain circumstances. And then years later, when I ran for office, they were the first people I called because they knew me better than anybody, that if I went out to a reception and shook somebody's hand or just went out to lunch with somebody cold. So I think that, a lot of people think networking means, well, let me call this person that I've never met before, sit down and have a meeting with them, go to lunch with them, and try to forge a relationship that way. And that's important, but that's not where the true mentors and true colleagues that you will need throughout your career, that's not how those relationships are formed. Those relationships are formed, you meet each other at a board meeting or community meeting or whatever, and you work together to accomplish a goal. So that's my best advice.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any more?
Okay. Well, if there aren't any more questions, then I guess we can go ahead and wrap up. I just want to really thank you for your honesty and just the really down-to-earth approach you took to this conversation, because this perspective is like the perspective, you would get from a mentor, that you trust, and it's really valuable, and so we don't take it lightly. So thank you.
Oh, well, thank you, Crystal. Thanks for having me.
I definitely echo Crystal's perspective. Thank you so much for joining us and taking time out of what we know is a very, very busy schedule, especially now that there's still session pieces and the budget's still being worked out. Yeah. So we really thank you for that and really appreciate your advice.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, guys.
And don't forget to follow our social media on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Tumblr, Instagram, and YouTube. Thank you very much.